All right, welcome to another edition of Beyond the Touchline. I'm Adrian. He is Nick.
Good morning, Adrian. Good to see you again.
How are you? And are you feeling in a South American mood? Because I felt like we ought to devote an episode to the South American influence that will be felt at the forthcoming World Cup.
Claro que sí, señor.
You're gonna push me to the limit with my Spanish, which doesn't take much. And I thought, Nick, who better to have on to talk to us about what we could expect from the South Americans this summer than one Alejandro Moreno. I know you're familiar with him. What springs to mind for you when you think of Ale?
Well, whenever I'm watching games on the Spanish language stations, Ali's face actually shows up a lot, together with one of our former guests, Hercules Gomez. So the two of them seem to have the Spanish language broadcasting rights to America.
Yeah, and Ali does a great job at English too. He's everywhere. He's everywhere in the broadcasting world. He's everywhere across the ESPN spectrum. But of course, he was a former player at the national team level for Venezuela and has a lot of great experiences to get into. I don't know how we're going to avoid not constantly mentioning the fact that Venezuela didn't make it, Nick. Somehow we're going to have to. It's going to come up. I know it is, but
he will probably bring up 1994 and throw that in our faces.
Right. There's plenty of England throwback. Venezuela didn't make it. They've never made it, but Ali has been everywhere around the South American circuit during World Cup qualifying as a player and, of course, as a broadcaster. So he'll be able to give us tremendous insights here on Beyond the Touchline. Alejandro Moreno joining us from a snowy Connecticut. So here we go, Beyond the Touchline, and welcome, Mr. Alejandro Moreno. Ali, fantastic to see your shining, beaming face.
Thank you.
We wanted to bring you on because South America is going to be a big part of what we're going to witness this summer at the World Cup. 6 nations made it, and you are wearing your Vino Tinto shirt, quite literally. And it's a shirt you wore with great distinction around South America for the best part of a decade. What's it like playing in South America in World Cup qualifying? What sort of memories do you have, both good and bad?
Well, first of all, let's address the fact that the jersey still fits me. That in itself is, yay me, that's a step forward. We're moving in the right direction. As it pertains to World Cup qualifiers for us in Venezuela, and I can obviously just speak on the experiences from the Venezuelan perspective, what I think I'm most proud of and what we should be most proud of is the fact that my generation was part of the turnaround of what the perception of South American football was over the years. Before our time, it felt like we were an afterthought, and I believe that my generation was instrumental in changing that perception, in changing the reality of what La Vino Tinto has become and has now put us as a country in a position where we can actually dream about going to the World Cup. It hasn't happened just yet, and I think that would be the negative. For as many good things as we did as a team and as a generation for over a decade, the fact that we were not able to take that final step is the one thing that I believe everybody that was part of that group would look back and say, we were there and we just didn't quite have the know-how. We didn't quite have the experience. We were the first ones with a real opportunity to do it for Venezuela, and we just were unable to find in those key moments to be able to deliver the performance that it was required. And obviously now I have the blessing, if you will, of being removed from the situation and seeing it from afar and be able to understand why things didn't happen. And it's, of course, one of the things that I think all of us that were part of that group regret, the fact that we did not give ourselves the best chance by putting together the best performance. When it was time to put together that best performance, history went against us, lack of know-how went against us, and our own lack of sense of belief that we were capable of doing that also went against us.
I think our audience probably knows the affinity for baseball that Venezuela has. What's the participation like for football down there right now?
Well, it's always been sort of baseball as our national sport, But I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that our baseball players are known worldwide and at the Major League Baseball level, which is, of course, the highest level possible that you can play, they're known as great players. We haven't had that with soccer. And look, when I first came to Major League Soccer through the collegiate path, part of the reason as to I went to college in the United States is because there was no path for me to continue to play soccer beyond whatever I did in high school. The idea of becoming a professional soccer player was not a reality, and certainly not from somebody with my upbringing, where my parents, both college graduates, working professionals, they're thinking, you want to do what? I'm sorry, what? It was difficult to sell my parents on the idea that I wanted to continue to play. And the only way that I was able to do it was to go through college and then on to MLS. But my point was going to be that once I made it into MLS and I got called into the national team, at that time, there were only 4 or 5 of us that were playing abroad from the national team. Everybody else was playing in Venezuela. And I think that paints a picture as to how difficult it was for the Venezuelan players to thrive because of the perception that, yeah, we're a baseball country. And so therefore, you must not know what you're doing with the ball in your feet. And then when the national team played and we didn't get the results and we got embarrassed by teams here and there in South America, then it was confirmation of that. That has changed. And to answer your question, I've taken the scenic route to get there, but I'll get there eventually. To answer your question, participation has always been high for soccer, but passion for soccer has been based upon European leagues and supporting Real Madrid or Barcelona. Or at the time that I was growing up, it was Juventus or Napoli, and Maradona was playing for Napoli. And those were the conversations, and there was always passion for that. But now the difference is that there's a passion that exists for the Venezuelan player and for the national team. And again, I take great pride in saying that it was my generation and what we were able to do that sort of jump-started that and gave now a platform, a much bigger platform for these players to showcase what they're all about and to get opportunities abroad that we simply were not getting when I was a player.
South America, Ali, is incredibly varied, incredibly competitive. What was the hardest place to go for you as a player? What was the one city or venue where you're like, oh God, we got to go there?
Well, I think most people would think going to La Paz and going to Bolivia because of the physical element of the altitude. But in all honesty, the toughest place to go is when you go and play at Argentina or you go and play at Brazil. And the reason is very simple and it's very obvious. They're really good. They're really, really good. So the first time I played in a World Cup qualifier, when I say I play, I use that loosely. I was sitting comfortably on the bench. And we went to Brazil to play, obviously, against Brazil in a World Cup qualifier. And this was ahead of the 2006 World Cup. We were in Belém do Pará playing against Brazil. And I knew the environment was different. When we were heading to the stadium, people in Brazil were just along the streets, were just like, they did not care one bit that we were showing up. They knew how good they were, and they knew we were not that good. And you then see, again, from my comfortable seat on the bench, you see their starting 11 line up in front of you, and it's Cafu, it's Roberto Carlos, it's Ronaldo, it's Ronaldinho. And then the big question was like, well, is Robinho going to play? Or are we, wait a minute, I don't know, is Adriano going to play? And you're thinking to yourself, this is crazy talk. All the while, when we look at our team, I'm like, yeah, we have Alejandro over there. Yeah, I don't think that's quite enough. And when you play against that sort of opposition, in that sort of environment, you know full well, and that's the first realization for me as a professional at the time, that even if we played at our best, even if we were lights out that night, if they played at their best, we had no chance. And that's a hard realization for a professional player, because you're there to compete and you try to give yourself the best chance possible, but these guys are at a different level entirely. It was the same thing when we went and played at Argentina. I believe this was sort of the 2010 World Cup, and it was the first official match for Maradona as the coach of Argentina. So it was, emotionally, it was charged already. and it was hard enough to play against Argentina. And then there's Agüero, and there's Messi, and there's this guy, and there's that guy, and who's over here? Oh, that's Zanetti. Oh, but Zanetti's old. Yeah, but still Javier Zanetti. And you're looking at players all around you, and you kind of go, yeah. Altitude may be altitude because physically it's very demanding, but you cannot ignore the quality of players that teams like Argentina and Brazil have had over the years and that had during that time.
So I think a lot of people will consider CONMEBOL as one of the most difficult qualification processes, right? In obviously the size of the confederation, but also the quality of the teams. But they do get 6.5 teams to qualify for the World Cup. Like, what are the pros and the contras about the qualification process in CONMEBOL? Like, do you feel like it is the hardest, or do you feel like the fact that 6.5 out of 10 teams have the opportunity to go is a pretty good system to have?
I think it used to be the hardest before this expanded World Cup, which, let me just tell you, let me just get this out of the way. The World Cup is supposed to be an exclusive tournament, not an inclusive tournament. And some people will say, well, but this opens a door of opportunity for everybody else. Well, it's not open mic night. Not everybody gets a chance. And even for me, for a Venezuelan that has a better chance to qualify for the World Cup in the first time in our history, it's still disappointing to have an expanded World Cup. I don't like it. And it would give us a better chance to qualify, even though we did not take that chance this time around. Obviously, I'm bitter about it. I have not turned the page on it. But regardless, I don't like the expanded World Cup, and because I do think that it dilutes the qualification process in CONMEBOL, for example. Now, why do I think that it used to be the hardest? Because when it was 4.5 when I was playing, then I believe that became what it is now. You had Argentina and Brazil that you knew were going to qualify. And then after that, it's just, well, it's Uruguay, it's Colombia. If it's not them, it's Chile. And at that time, you have to remember that when I was playing, Chile had that generation of Alexis Sanchez. And you kind of go, yeah, that's a generation that actually won Copa America. That's a generation that actually did a lot of things, not only in South America, but also were featuring heavily in the World Cup and the World Cup scene. So it's just, what people may not understand is that what used to be this idea that there were some easy games with teams like Venezuela or Bolivia, that is no longer the case. And wherever you go in South America, you're going to have to grind. And there's so many differences that in terms of climate, in terms of the logistics of travel. See, there's this image that, well, you just get in a private charter and you go from here to there. What's the problem? What's the issue? Think and believe that my country is organized enough to make that happen smoothly. We're not. And neither are most of the other countries in South America. And so the logistics of travel, the logistics of training, the logistics of preparation, the fact that you're playing abroad and you're having to fly all over the world to kind of come back and somehow look like a team, and then travel to places like Barranquilla, Colombia, that is hot, and I mean hot, and then you go from there and play in Santiago, Chile, and it's cold, freezing cold, and then you go from Santiago, Chile to La Paz, and you can't breathe, and then you think you're getting a break if you go to Quito. You still can't breathe in Quito. It's not as high as La Paz, but still high enough. And again, these are things that just kind of, you have the quality of Argentina, the quality of Uruguay, the quality of Brazil. That makes it challenging without any sort of climate conditions. The refereeing is a problem as well. There are a lot of things that go into this that make it a very challenging process. And it still continues to be challenging, but now it feels a lot like, look, if you don't make at least a playoff position in South America, you're terrible. You're terrible. And it's hard for me to accept that because obviously we didn't make a playoff position. But if you're one of those teams that either didn't qualify or didn't make the playoff, you did some bad things during qualifiers. And it's, again, hard for me to accept that.
Yeah. And Ali, not to mention that the whole qualifying process is a marathon, 18 games. I mean, it's twice as many as most European nations.
It's over a period of about 3.5 years. And so no team in the world remains the same and consistently so over that period of time. you think about the highs and lows of players in 1 year, but imagine over the period of 3 years, how do you remain consistently so? And it's something that hurt Venezuela this time around. Venezuela started really hot in qualifiers and were in qualifying positions for most of the qualification process. And then injuries here, concerns there, players underperforming here, underperforming there. And then whatever momentum you had early on, you cannot carry over 3 years. That's impossible to do. That's part of the challenging issue with qualifying in South America, that it's not a period of a couple months, it's a period of 3 years to sort out whether you're going to the World Cup or not.
Final thing on this, Ali, before we get into who actually did make it and their prospects. Some mental gymnastics I'm going to ask you to perform. Take the country of Italy, cut it out in all its glory and plonk it in the continent of South America. And then do the same with your beloved Venezuela. Cut it out, plonk it in Europe. Do they make it? Does Venezuela qualify from Europe? Does Italy qualify from South America? Impossible to answer, I know, but...
Well, first of all, it depends on the group that you land on. That there are some groups in Europe that you kind of go, all right, look, listen. All right, you can take Gibraltar and you can keep it. Now, there are certain groups that they were decided even before the qualification process started. And that's that's the part that it's kind of like, all right, listen, Europe, relax with complaints about your qualification process. There are a lot of teams in Europe that are less than underwhelming. There are some terrible teams that people don't talk about because they're not worth talking about. Now, I think Venezuela would be competitive, but I would put Venezuela at the same level of, say, somebody like Scotland, for example.
Yeah.
Right there or thereabouts. I think that would be a very competitive match. And I'm not suggesting that we're world beaters. We're not. But I do think that in the right setting, we would have a chance to, at the very least, enter the playoff qualification process of Europe. In second in a group that certainly when you think about some of those back-end teams in Europe, you're going to go, yeah, well, we can play against those guys. For me, it's just, look, I have my thoughts about the qualification process, but I cannot talk about the shortcomings of Europe, the shortcomings of CONCACAF in their qualification process. The fact that there are as many CONCACAF teams in this World Cup it's a travesty, to be honest with you. There aren't that many good teams in CONCACAF that should be in this World Cup, but that's again a product of the expanded World Cup. But it does not excuse for Venezuela collapsing late as we did. So while I have my issues with what goes on in Europe or CONCACAF, I also recognize that our shortcomings are our own.
I hear shots fired at Curacao there, Nick.
Well, they got great beaches.
You can see them in Venezuela, can't you?
Yes, they got great beaches. They're not better than Venezuelan beaches, but there you go. I don't know what to tell you. But look, we were having a conversation about New Caledonia making a World Cup. What?
Right.
What? No offense to anybody, but come on now. And let's not even get into the World Cup conversation on some of these first round matchups, some of these group stage matchups. Yikes. I mean,
all right. Well,
I do want to say one thing, Adrian. I know it's hard to compare, teams from different confederations. Were you surprised that Bolivia did not make it past Iraq?
No, because Bolivia are terrible. No, and we should not have finished below Bolivia, but you take them out of not even La Paz. Now, La Paz wasn't enough for them. They took it even higher in the qualification process. They went to a place to call El Alto, which is you get to La Paz, stop breathing in La Paz, and you keep going. So they take advantage of the resources they have available, and they did enough, and they beat Brazil in the last match, so that's to their credit, and we collapsed against Colombia, and so that's our shortcoming. But no, I'm not surprised that Bolivia lost because it's not a good team. Let me just very quickly say to you this about Italy. You put them in CONMEBOL, and we're talking about the same Italian players right now, this group of Italian players. Can you trust those guys to grind through some of the things I mentioned a few minutes ago? That grinding in the conditions, grinding in the travel, grinding in the climate, grinding in all those things that I just mentioned, that not everything is straightforward, not everything is VIP. Things are difficult in South America, and for anybody that has spent any time in South America would know that things are not straightforward. So you would not get the VIP treatment. You would be in very difficult conditions. The field is not what you want it to be. The referee is not what you want it to be. And you're playing against teams that are playing for their lives, for survival. That's how much it means to all of them. Let me just say, this version of Italy would struggle to get out of CONMEBOL.
They'd reach the playoffs and lose to Bolivia, is what you're saying. That's what they do.
Well, Bolivia are terrible.
All right. Well, you've teed us up perfectly, the pro that you are, Ali, to talk about the teams that did make it, the 6 South American nations that we'll be seeing this summer. So, 6 South American nations to look forward to being part of the Jamboree, the open mic night, as Ali has so beautifully described it, the World Cup this summer. Let's start at the top, Ali, with the giants. Look at Argentina and Brazil first. Nick, where do you want to start with Argentina?
Yeah, let's begin with Argentina. What is realistic for the group? Is this one of the deepest squads they've had, even with or without Messi out there?
Realistic is World Cup champion. In what we talked about, CONMEBOL being a complicated area of the world to qualify and to play those games because of all the things that I mentioned earlier, they flew through qualifying. They were far and away the best team in CONMEBOL, and they were able to maintain momentum from their last World Cup win into the qualification process. They have everything you would want from a team going into a World Cup. The one thing that I don't know that they have as compared to what they had going into Qatar is the sense of urgency that it has to be now or it'll never happen for us or for Lionel Messi. And that sense of urgency, I think, is required in those moments where things get tough, when games get tight, when things become a grind. You need to have that little extra something that you can't really put a finger on. You can't really tactically define it. It's something, it's the it factor that special teams have and that Argentina had in the World Cup in Qatar. Do they have that same it factor in this World Cup? Well, I don't know that they have that same sort of urgency, and they're going to need it. Lionel Messi, more so now than even in Qatar, it's very much a guy of moment during 90 minutes. It's not a thorough performance over 90 minutes. He is a guy for certain specific moments. And so everybody around him, much like they did in Qatar, is going to have to elevate their performance and be able to provide Messi with a platform where he can provide those moments of magic.
One of the things that I've noticed is that 5 out of the 6 teams that qualified have Argentinian coaches.
Yeah, and the only reason that Brazil doesn't have an Argentinian coach is because they would rather die before they did that. But yeah, it speaks to there's something to be said about leadership, knowledge, experience, and these coaches from Argentina have a tendency of getting their teams to play at a high level in moments of high pressure and high tension. It feels like a generalization, but it's a stat that cannot be denied, and there must be something to the Argentina coach and understanding sort of what's required to squeeze the very best out of this team. And it's not something that people can say, well, it's because the love of the jersey. Well, no, because Nestor Lorenzo for Colombia, look, I'm sure he loves Colombia, but it's not the love of the jersey. It's something different that he's able to squeeze out of this team in order to get their best performances when it matters. And they're going to need a lot of that at the World Cup.
Nestor Lorenzo loved the Swindon Town jersey as well. I just want to get that in there. But back to Argentina, history tells us it's very hard to repeat as a champion. In fact, it's hardly ever happened. I mean, you look at recent history, teams have got back to the final and lost. Brazil did that in 94, 98. France did it 18-22. Argentina themselves won it in 86, made the final. But actually winning it again is very, very hard.
Yeah.
So
and honestly, Adrian, it's not a surprise because think of all the things that have to go your way in order for you to win a World Cup. And now, with an expanded field, there's going to be extra opportunities for you to mess this up. Argentina lost their first game of the last World Cup against Saudi Arabia. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
And so, but what if that poor game didn't happen against Saudi Arabia? What if it happened in a knockout stage? And then you're done. And it's game, set, match, and what might have been, what could have been. I think Argentina has a lot going for them. I don't know that they have that edgy feeling that I got from them in the last World Cup. I need to see more from guys like Rodrigo de Paul that were so instrumental to their success in the last World Cup. I need to see some of that nastiness. And I haven't seen it certainly enough with Inter Miami. And that's part of the concern with him playing instead of Atletico Madrid playing at Inter Miami, that it's this whole ode to Lionel Messi, the Lionel Messi stand, how wonderful all of this is. And it's magical for Inter Miami and Major League Soccer. But I don't know that the Argentina fan will benefit from the fact that Rodrigo de Paul hasn't been nearly as edgy as he was and going into the World Cup in 2022, and how important he was in protecting Lionel Messi and protecting the midfield of Argentina. They're going to need a lot of that in this World Cup. They're going to have a lot of support. There's going to be a lot of people supporting Argentina in this country, and a lot of momentum. And they will go deep in this tournament. When it gets to the latter stages, we'll see whether Argentina is able to break through or not.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to Adrian. Obviously we're here in Austin. I don't know if you can see that. Watching the game at the weekend, and it looked like Rodrigo didn't even want to be there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you said it. All I'm telling you is that we're seeing some behaviors that are not ideal for Lionel Scaloni from players leading into the World Cup. Because Argentina, while they are very good players, while they have extremely talented players, some of the best players in the world, I think what makes them among the best teams in the world is not just the quality of players. They have that little extra something. They have extra juice. Some would call it the dark arts. I wouldn't go as far as to say that, but they live and play in the fringes of legality. And in order to do that, you have to play with a certain attitude and a certain feeling. And I just haven't had that feeling about Argentina. They play against Mauritania. Not that that's an important match, but they play against Mauritania just a couple of weeks ago, and it was a very underwhelming performance. They came back against Zambia and won 5-0. Everybody's, it's all good. It's all good with Argentina. I don't know that it's all good. They're good enough certainly to get out of the group and make a run, and then they get into the knockout stage. Quarterfinals, semifinals are going to get tough for Argentina, and that's when I need to see that edge. That's when I need to see the nastiness that I think makes this team a complete team. They have balance. They can play in the back line. They have balance in the midfield. They have attacking talent. They have an experienced coach. They have had success, but that part, the fact that they have had success is sustaining success. That's a problem.
Yeah, it will be interesting. You mentioned it, Ali, to see if the crowd plays a massive part for them, because it certainly did in Qatar. I mean, they were just phenomenal. Tens of thousands of them traveling to Qatar. It was almost like they were willing Messi to win as a nation. So we'll see if that sort of numbers turn up in the US, and there's all sorts of issues around that, which we won't touch on this, though. We don't have time to. But let's talk about another nation who are always well supported, the other giant from South America, Brazil. What do you see? Rodrigo, Vini Jr., Rafinha, Endrick. Is this the bunch of players, the squad to restore Brazil as a dominant force in the world?
Well, while you mentioned those names, Rodrigo's already taken himself out of that conversation because obviously he blew out his knee. So that opens up a space for, could it be? Because this is a conversation in Brazil. I'm not making this up. Neymar, he may be the solution. And some people have opinions on that. I really think that he hasn't done enough to force Ancelotti into decision to include him because he just hasn't been fit. And when he has been fit, hasn't been productive enough. So I'm just going to put him to the side. And I'm going to talk about the guys that are indeed available. Vini Jr., while has been great at Real Madrid, hasn't been nearly as consistent nor productive with Brazil. Rafinha has had a leadership role in Brazil, much like he has had at Barcelona, but not necessarily all that productive consistently so. João Pedro yet to score an international goal with Brazil. And so now you start going deeper and deeper and deeper. And now you're talking about guys like, okay, well, is Endrick the answer? Is Tevao the answer? Igor Thiago, is he the answer? And we haven't even mentioned the fact that this team lacks a lot of balance in the midfield and defensively. I mentioned earlier, Cafu, Roberto Carlos, and you look at this group and it's like, well, who do we?
Yeah.
Douglas Santos is playing left back. Who? What? If Douglas Santos walked into my house right now, I would be calling security and going, who is this guy? Where did he come from? So it's just, all I'm suggesting is that Brazil, we pay attention to their attacking talent. I think they're going to be exposed through the midfield. And their best chance of going deep in this competition is to be a counter-attacking team, a team that absorbs pressure and actually makes up for the fact that they have the absence of numbers in the midfield because Carlo Ancelotti is going with 4 very attacking players. You have Casemiro and whoever plays alongside him. And just in numbers alone, if you have a team that plays with 4 midfielders, with 3 midfielders, some will play with 5 in the middle area, that's a mismatch already in the middle area of the field. And so in terms of numbers, how is Carlo Ancelotti going to be able to counteract that? Well, he's going to have to sit back, absorb some pressure, force a turnover in an area in which then they can spring the attack forward and depend on Vini Jr. to do something special. I don't think Brazil has enough to win this competition. I think they have quarterfinal written all over them. And anything after that, I would be surprised because I think this team has a lot of flaws.
I'm fascinated to see how Carlo Ancelotti does. I mean, his pedigree in knockout tournaments, let's not forget that's what this is. His pedigree in knockout tournaments at club level is unparalleled. So is that going to translate to a national team competition?
What I would say about Ancelotti is this counter-attacking system, if you will, or approach is much like what he did with Real Madrid in the last few years where they were successful in Champions League, where everybody evaluating Real Madrid would talk about how fortunate they had been and how they were depending on saves by Thibaut Courtois and how it was just a counter-attacking team, that the magic of the Bernabeu and the late comebacks and this, that, and the other. But it was never about, well, this is a great team, or it has a lot of balance, or has a lot of quality in the back and a lot of quality in the midfield. No. It was much more of a counter-attacking approach. And I think he's going to take a lot from what he did at Real Madrid and try to do the same in Brazil. Again, they're good enough for me to get to the quarterfinals. After that, it gets tight.
We've got one more on Brazil. Never been more out than 5 World Cups without a Brazil victory. I'm going to throw some history at you again. They tend to win in clumps. They had that brilliant period, the Pelé period, let's call it, 58 to 70. Let's call it the Romario, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho period, 94 to 02, where they made 3 finals in a row. They've never gone more than 5 World Cups without winning it. They've gone 5 World Cups without winning it. You know, what has to happen for them to supersede your expectations of a quarterfinal place?
Yeah, a lot has to go right for them, and a lot has to go wrong for others, some of the other elite teams. Look, Joao Pedro was giving an interview to our colleagues on ESPN Brazil ahead of the game that I believe might have been either the France game or the game that came after that for Brazil in this last international break, Brazil-Croatia.
Yeah.
And ahead of one of those games, I believe it was Brazil-Croatia, he was asked about some of the pressures of playing for Brazil and the expectations that came from Brazil. And I thought he was going to take it in the direction of, well, you know, when you have won the World Cup as many times as Brazil has, and you have the history that Brazil has, of course there's going to be expectation, but we are working together to try to get to that level so that we can deliver for the Brazilian people. Look, I could have done the interview myself if I'd been Joao Pedro. That's the direction I would have taken it. But no. He took it in the direction of, you know, people talk about Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Romario, and that level, and I think we have players of that level now. Wrong. You don't.
Right.
You don't. The players he mentioned, Ronaldo, Romario, Ronaldinho, are all-time greats. All-time greats. In the history, in the wide history of this beautiful game, those guys are all-time greats. Nobody currently with Brazil, I'm not talking about Neymar, I'm talking about currently with Brazil, is an all-time great. Vini Jr. has been great for Real Madrid in moments and hasn't translated that into success with Brazil. And until he's able to do that, you cannot consider him a Brazilian all-time great. And I can go down the list of players in this very Brazilian squad that you can call them all-time greats. In order to win a World Cup, you need to have a really good team, but you also have to have all-time greats within that squad. Just go down the history of teams that have won the World Cup, and you need to have players that you go, that guy is different. That guy is an all-time great. Brazil don't have that, and I just don't think they have enough.
Which is probably exactly why the bookies have them only fifth favourites to win the World Cup, behind Argentina, France, Spain, and somehow England, Nick. We won't go there, but what we're going to do is take a break and then whiz you through. We have 4 more nations to get to. We will increase the amount of time or decrease it that we spend. So more to come on Beyond the. Talking to Alejandro Moreno, former Venezuela international, here on Beyond the Touchline. We've dealt with Brazil and Argentina. Let's look at what we perhaps can call the nearly or almost men, Colombia and Uruguay. I'm going to group those two together for you, Ali. Nick, do you want to start with Colombia?
Yes, let's do that. Obviously, with 2 Argentinian coaches, Nestor Lorenzo and Bielsa. You could say that Colombia is a form team right now, together with Ecuador, maybe. And James Rodriguez, Minnesota player, is 34. Is he still a factor, or has his moment passed? And do you think they can go further than their famous 2004?
Well, let me start with the last question first. The answer is no. Quarterfinals would be a great World Cup for Brazil. I mean, for Colombia. Well, it would be a good World Cup for Brazil too, as I mentioned earlier. But no, Colombia, if anything beyond the quarterfinal, would be a dream for Colombia, and I just don't think they have it in them. Nestor Lorenzo has to make a very difficult decision. Is James Rodriguez and whatever he gives you, whatever those special moments that he may think James Rodriguez is going to give him in the World Cup, is he worthwhile? Is he worth sacrificing other things on the field because you think he gives you something special? Adrian and I called the game of France against Colombia in the international break. And what was noticeable is, yes, when he gets on the ball, he can still pick out a pass. Yes, in set pieces, he can still deliver a ball, and he'll have a moment or two with a back heel here and a flick on there that you kind of go, oh. But what they're sacrificing is shape. The team and whoever plays in the midfield is going to have to run a whole lot because James Rodriguez is just not giving you that work. Now, some would say, well, doesn't Argentina do the same thing with Lionel Messi? And that's when I'll stop people and go, repeat that. Argentina does that for Lionel Messi. James Rodriguez is not Lionel Messi. And this current version of James Rodriguez, while he continues to somehow be a really important part for Colombia, he's not playing and hasn't been playing consistently with the multitude of club teams that he has been a part of. And something happens with him when he gets a Colombian jersey on that he finds some life somewhere. But eventually that runs dry. I don't think that you ride and die with James Rodriguez. I think your main player is Luis Diaz, and that you hope you can hang on defensively. You hope that you can come up with saves from your goalkeeper, whoever that may be, Camilo Vargas probably. That's not a guarantee in terms of what this guy is able to do in goal. You're going to get a lot of work from Richard Rios in the midfield. You're going to get a lot of work from John Arias and joining in the attack. You hope that you get goals from Luis Suarez and the center forward position. Colombia is a dangerous team and a team that will add a whole lot of flavor to this tournament. The Colombian fans will be all over this team, will support this team everywhere they go, and they will be very much a team that will be a protagonist up until round of 16, quarterfinals, and then thanks for coming. We appreciate your efforts.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned 2014, Ali, because you and I had the pleasure of calling a couple of those Colombia games at that World Cup, and they were a true phenomenon. But it's not just James Rodriguez. They have other players still involved from that squad. Arias, even David Ospina. I know he's the backup goalkeeper, but that's a long time ago. It's 12 years ago, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's 12 years ago, not to circle back on James Rodriguez, but if we're going to go with what James Rodriguez was supposed to be following that World Cup and that performance in that World Cup, where he was outstanding, where he was one of a kind, where he just took a leap in his career and became a household name, and then never really deliver on it. Was never really able to establish himself for a long period of time somewhere. And you're thinking, well, a guy this sort of talent, and yet, and I'll just take some of the decisions made by, say, for example, Zidane with Real Madrid. There were moments in which he would look at his team and Lucas Vázquez would play ahead of James Rodriguez. Now, Lucas Vázquez is a serviceable professional, a guy who has had a tremendous career and has maximized everything that he has done individually. That you cannot say about James Rodriguez. I don't think he has maximized his skill set. And so, in a moment in time, he can do something special, but a moment in time, I don't think it's enough for Colombia and for James Rodriguez. Like I said, once they get to a level in which they have to play teams like we saw against France in that friendly that I just referenced, I think there's a clear difference between what the best looks like and what Colombia looks like. They will be competitive, they will be tough to play against, they will be excited about the crowd and the support that they're getting talent-wise, and the depth of the team also has to be in question. They just don't have it to get beyond the teams that are considered to be elite.
And they will have 2 World Cup debutants in their group, Uzbekistan and DR Congo. Yeah, Zaire being there, but it's a new name. So both of those games in Mexico, then they get Portugal in Miami. Nick, do you want to tee us up for Uruguay?
Yeah, so explain to me how this small country of 3.5 million people is consistently able to punch at a weight far above their size. Like, how do they keep doing that? And and also the Bielsa factor, do you think he's going to be able to transform their identity at
Well, I think the identity of Uruguay over the years, and for those of us that played in South America, is tough. They're just tough. They'll grind with the best of them. And I think it's different from other teams that play at a high level. They actually enjoy the grind and look forward to the grind much more so than other teams that want to play. I think Uruguay are uncomfortable with being comfortable. They like this thing to be contested and 50-50 challenges and duels and yelling and screaming and getting in your face. And it's all about sort of hard passion and the sort of the knife between your teeth kind of approach. It is who they are, and it is within their blood. It is within their culture. It is within how they grow up. So to answer your question, how does a country this small able to create, manufacture, recreate, remanufacture talent, and you just see these players developing over time? It's because it is what they're designed to do. It is what they're designed to do. Just like the little kid that grows up in Venezuela is designed to be a baseball player, and that has been the case over the years, it is what an Uruguayan player is supposed to be. A kid, it's out on the streets playing soccer all day, every day. You go to Montevideo, Uruguay's capital, and you'll have teams, professionals, semi-professionals, everywhere. And if you want a picture of what Uruguay is like and how obsessed they are about the game, look no further than Fede Valverde and watch that guy run all day, every game. Every coach in the world, I don't care what level you've coached, I don't care where in the world, you watch a guy like Fede Valverde and you go, that guy would be the first name on my list every single time because you don't have to worry about him. You know he's going to deliver a performance for you. And while I say that about Fede Valverde, and I am as high on Fede Valverde as I am on any player around the world, I would also say they're short in attacking talent. They're short in creativity in the attack. So their games will become very much a grind as they were in qualifiers, but they are very comfortable in that environment. So look look for a lot of 1-0s, 2-1s sort of games for Uruguay. They're not outscoring a bunch of teams. They're grinding a bunch of teams.
Yeah, Luis Suarez and Edison Cavani just recently retiring. So that leaves a vacuum, as you suggest, Ali.
Yeah, here's a name that some English people, or most English people, would be familiar with, Darwin Núñez. He's still hovering somewhere, hanging around, but he still has the inconsistencies that he had at Liverpool. One moment he shows up and he looks like a world beater, and then the next day you kind of go, this guy cannot trap a ball. And so they're looking around and thinking, okay, who is that guy that is going to give us what Luis Suarez used to give us? And who's that guy that is going to give us something creative coming out of the midfield? And I just don't think they have that within them. There'll be a player like Jorge de Arrascaeta, who plays in Brazil, and you're thinking he has something about him up to a certain level. I don't believe Uruguay has enough creative talent to really get truly deep in this conversation or in this World Cup. There's no Diego Forlán hanging around for Uruguay, right? It's a lot of grinding, and grind will get you so far, and they'll get into the group, out of the group stages, and they'll get into round of 32 and then round of 16, and that's when you start seeing some of the flaws show up, because they're going to need a moment from somebody, and I don't know that somebody's in that team right now.
So that was the nearly almost men in Colombia and Uruguay. Final category, the outsiders. May not be fair to categorize them as that, but Paraguay and Ecuador, we've put them together. Nick, do you want to take us towards Ecuador?
Yeah, sure. I'm not really familiar with Sebastián Becasese, but I understand he's a disciple of Bielsa.
Maybe he's not all there up here, but okay.
But what does that do for their style of play? What are they going to bring to the World Cup?
And it's I think where you can see some of the influences from Bielsa is in the way they press the ball, particularly when they play at home in Quito. But they're not playing at home in Quito in the World Cup. And so I'll be interested to see whether they're actually willing to go and press the ball that way all over the field and create 1v1 matchups. A lot of the things that Ecuador does really well is that physically they can be an overwhelming team. They have a lot of big, strong guys, tough guys that will, more times than not, physically are able to go press the ball, dominate some of that pressure, and then create a turnover, and they go from there. I don't believe that they'll be able to do that consistently in the World Cup. And what I think may end up happening with Ecuador is that they'll retreat. Instead of going to press the ball, they'll retreat, and absorb pressure, hoping that Caicedo can force a turnover, and then they can go in the attack. But much like Uruguay, they have their limitations in the attacking half. They're not nearly, at least not historically, they're not nearly as mentally tough as Uruguay. They're not up for the grind nearly as much as Uruguay is. But it must be said that in CONMEBOL's qualifier this time around, Ecuador found themselves in a position in which they were looking down on Uruguay and looking down at other teams, and they felt like they were sort of the team that had a far more solid plan about them than everybody else. So they were very consistent through qualifiers. I don't know that they have enough about them, much like Uruguay in the attack to get. They'll provide some flavor to this tournament. They'll give it the old college try, but not much further than the round of 16.
They're in a decent group, I think, right? With Germany, Cote d'Ivoire, and Curaçao.
Yeah. So they have a chance to finish second in that group, and if you do that, then you may have a favorable matchup in the round of 32, and then maybe that allows you to get into the round of 16. But that's when I think it gets a little tight for Ecuador. I don't think they get much further than that.
And last but not least, Ali, and all the US listeners will be keying in on this, your assessment of the team that's in with the US, Australia and Turkey. That would be Paraguay. Another team who seem to have concentrated on making themselves difficult to beat. How difficult a task will it be for the US?
Well, and honestly, listening to people sort of kind of project what the group is going to look like for the United States, they're talking about us, well, Turkey's going to be the tough game, but yeah, we can manage Australia and we can manage Paraguay. And I think you're overlooking, in the case of Paraguay, a team that they were on the outside looking in, coming into the latter stages of World Cup qualifier, and they got hot. They got hot with coaching change. They got hot with player personnel change, choices that were made late in the qualification process, and they went away from Asunción and they won games away from Asunción. Then they went back to Defensores del Chaco, the stadium they play in Asunción, and they won games at home, and they went on a run in which they strung together a bunch of positive results to finish qualification process to the point to where they were no longer in the conversation. Are they going to be in the playoffs or not? No, we're going to qualify straight through. And I think that experience tells you that this team has been playing knockout stage football for a while already. And so when people are overlooking Paraguay here in the United States, I say, be careful. They are talented enough and they are tough enough, which they show in the latter stages of qualifiers, as I just mentioned, to make this into a far more interesting game and far more complicated game for the United States. If the United States think 3 points against Paraguay, that's it, that's in the bank, it's locked, I think they're making a gigantic mistake. Paraguay is a team, and from experience, and let me just tell you about Paraguay for a second. If you were to tell me what team do you detest in South American football, I would tell you it is Paraguay, all right? And for a good reason. They eliminated us in the semifinals of Copa America 2011 in a game that we should have won, and I hit the post, but obviously I've turned the page on that. I've let it go. And when we lost in penalties against them, we were better than them. They kept us out of the World Cup twice by losing to them twice in World Cup qualifiers, to the 2010 World Cup and the 2014 World Cup. So, look, I have great amount of respect for Paraguay, and I know what they are capable of doing when things get really tough. They showed it at the end of qualifiers. Do not overlook Paraguay.
Yeah. And it's the opening game for the US, isn't it? That's always an interesting dynamic when it's the first game in a tournament.
And mind you, it's not like the US are flying right now.
Right.
And that's a part that I people seem to believe like, well, the World Cup is here, so that must mean that we're going to win this game. Careful. Just saying, careful. The US should beat Paraguay. They should. But will they? That's a different conversation.
Ali, this has been absolutely terrific. One last thing, quick fire round of questions, some of them listener provided. Just give us your first kind of instinctive answer. No need to really kind of flesh it out at all. Do you want to start?
Yeah, who is the best player you have ever shared a pitch with?
Wow, there's been a lot.
I'll say without hesitation.
Well, there's been a lot. It's Kaká, Neymar, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Lionel Messi. I mean, my favorite player was Ronaldo, Brazilian Ronaldo, the original, the OG. So watching him from up close and personal, that was impressive. And he wasn't at his best by then, but still, he was an impressive, the body type, the physicality, and then the skill set with a guy that strong, that big, and how quick he was on his feet and how he would be able to get out of tight spaces. But as impressive as that was, stepping on the field in Argentina, and he wasn't playing at the time, but seeing Maradona in the sidelines and knowing full well what he meant to my upbringing and the upbringing to anybody who's from South America, you're like, oh, that's Maradona right there. You talk about intimidating. It's like, how did I get here? That this guy's coaching and I'm here on the field. It's one of those sort of pinch yourself kind of moments.
I saw Mr. Ronaldo hanging out with Mr. Beckham this past weekend.
Yes.
And I think I would still be very intimidated by it.
There's even more of him to be intimidated by.
Yes, I'm sure he had a couple of hors d'oeuvres.
All right. Two questions on stadium atmosphere. Best you ever played in, best you've ever broadcast from.
Well, you and I did a few on the broadcasting part in the World Cup in 2014. That game, Colombia and Brasilia, I think it stands out. I also did in that World Cup, I did Brazil against Mexico in I believe it was Fortaleza. Those Brazilian fans, when they were singing the national anthem, you felt it was something different. So yeah, that was pretty special. I mean, I've done clásicos in
Yep.
in the Camp Nou, and those obviously that's impressive as well. In terms of the playing part, there is something really, if you're a historian of the game, there is something really special about going to play in El Centenario in Montevideo in Uruguay. You feel like you are in the cradle of something there. And for people that don't know, the first World Cup final was in El Centenario.
Yep.
And you can feel the history in the stadium. You can also smell the history in the stadium, let me just tell you. The crevices
in many different forms.
Yeah, and the crevices of the stadium. A lot of time has gone by. You walk onto that field and you go, yeah, there's a lot that has gone on here, and a lot of that has been significant for this game. And mind you, in that particular game, the first time that I played at Centenario, we beat Uruguay 3-0 in World Cup qualifiers, which was sort of the beginning of this turnaround of the perception of Venezuela happened that night.
I have a question for you, kind of a little bit of a mind game here. What would happen if we combined CONCACAF with CONMEBOL for World Cup qualifying?
CONMEBOL teams in the World Cup.
Yes. But ultimately, would that make CONCACAF teams better?
Yeah, I don't know what you do with the Caribbean islands. I don't know what you do with. I don't know what you do with the. Wait, I'm just saying. Hey, Nick, that's part of CONCACAF too. I'm not, but
another shot fired at Curacao. There we go.
Yeah, I don't know what Nick has against Curacao and Trinidad and Tobago and everybody else.
Aruba is on the phone.
Yeah, look, I don't have any doubt in my mind, no doubt whatsoever, that if we ask the question that you asked earlier, Adrian, about, say you put the United States and Mexico and Canada qualifying in CONMEBOL, much like you asked the question about Italy, they would have a really tough time making the World Cup. They would have a really, really tough time making the World Cup.
Yeah.
You get these pretty boys down to some of these places in South America. I'm just telling you, Christian Pulisic doesn't want any part of that.
Yeah.
No, he doesn't.
They already struggle with some of the CONCACAF teams.
Yeah. Yeah. And they'll find some of the same struggles against better opposition, more talented teams. So, no, the U.S. can talk a big game about sort of being part of Copa America and being part of CONMEBOL and being part of this and that and the other. They don't want any part of that. They don't. Because when it comes down to it, when it comes to the grind, like, let me just ask you this for current players. If you had to grind, are you trusting Fede Valverde to grind, or are you trusting, I don't know, you pick any player from the midfield in the United States. You tell me, which one of those guys would you take ahead of Fede Valverde? The answer, take who you will, is nobody. Nobody. That's difference we're talking about here.
Okay, last one, Ali. And we have to end on a Vino Tinto note just to bring it round full circle. Give us one player from the current Venezuela team who you think might go on to surprise people. Maybe a name that hasn't come across many people's radars so far.
LAFC David Martinez, I think he's got something. He's got something about his game that could potentially put him in a different level altogether. But as it is a question for many of the young players coming through from Venezuela, is not only do you have the skill set, which I think he does, is you have to have something more. And I don't know him personally, so I couldn't talk to that and speak to that. I played with Juan Arango, who I think is our best player in the history of my country. And he had all the physical attributes. This man was something special. And nobody, and I've played against Beckham and a few others, nobody hit a ball the way this guy did. And a magical left foot and physical attributes and skill set that were just outstanding. And when he wanted to, he was among the best players in the world. And I have great admiration for that. But I also know that there was more for him to give. And I know I'm not telling you something controversial here. This is something that I said to him in his podcast. I think there was more for him to give. And it's something that he realized late in his career. And so when I look at David Martinez, I think there's something there, something special, but he has to be able to put that together with the mental aspect of the game and push himself to the limit so that we see him taking the same approach to the game that Alfredo Valverde does, and that separates, what a guy from Uruguay has been able to do historically as compared to what a guy from Venezuela hasn't been able to do historically.
Here in Austin, they would have been hoping you were going to say Danny Pereira as the answer to that question, but we're still waiting for him.
He's there and thereabouts.
Right.
You mentioned
Clock
one
is
guy. I can
running
only
out.
give you one guy.
Hey, Ali, thank you ever so much. This has been absolutely terrific. You have primed the pump, shall we say, for South America this summer. It is going to be fantastic to watch it all unfold. Always appreciate it. And I owe you a passion fruit mousse. What can I say?
From a Brasilia passion fruit mousse?
Inside
Man.
joke, Nick. It
Yeah.
was the race to see who could eat the most passion fruit mousse in Brazil in 2014.
And the runaway winner was Adrian.
By a short nose.
That's
maybe.
more than anything I've ever got from Adrian, so I'm jealous.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate
Hey.
the invitation, and I hope everything goes well with you guys and with the podcast. And so, again, thank you, and it was my pleasure to participate.
Terrific
Appreciate
stuff.